In recent weeks, the United States has escalated pressure on Venezuela.
The Caribbean sky glows with tension. Satellites catch the reflection of U.S. stealth fighters circling over the blue waters near Puerto Rico. On Venezuelan soil, airfields roar back to life as soldiers flood the runways, waiting for orders that could ignite the region. Both nations now face each other across the sea, one armed with power, the other with desperation. But who will make the first move? Let's find out. At dawn, the air above Ceiba, Puerto Rico, shimmered with the metallic gleam of F-35s cutting through humid clouds. Their mission wasn't training, it was positioning. 8 stealth fighters now sat armed and alert at the revived Roosevelt Roads base. Ground crews in desert uniforms worked without pause, refueling, recalibrating sensors, and loading precision-guided ordnance. The Caribbean air buzzed with tension as the U.S. Navy's most advanced strike force gathered momentum. The once silent base now thundered like a war drum. Since its closure in 2004, the airfield had fallen into decay. But in the past 2 weeks, military trucks, engineers, and contractors moved in. Power grids were reconnected. Old bunkers were cleaned. By night, runway lights burned bright again, casting eerie reflections across the bay. From the sea, the silhouette of the USS Gerald R. Ford emerged, a $13 billion fortress of steel, gliding toward the island. With over 75 aircraft aboard, it could dominate a battle zone spanning hundreds of miles. Every maneuver of that ship was a statement. America is back in the Caribbean. But Venezuela was watching too. Across the border, radar operators saw the surge. Screens blinked red. Caracas issued new orders. Prepare for asymmetric response. And deep inside Venezuela, the first countermove had already begun to take shape.
Still, it would be a mistake to ignore Venezuela's armed forces entirely.
The Gerald R. Ford was no ordinary carrier. It was the largest warship ever built, a floating city of 4,500 crew and electromagnetic catapults capable of launching 2 jets every minute. By the time it crossed into the Southern Command Zone, its escort fleet, destroyers and cruisers armed with over 300 Tomahawk missiles, had fanned out in defensive formation. Aboard the bridge, officers studied satellite feeds, showing Venezuela's northern coast. Each transmission showed new signs of mobilization: anti-aircraft batteries repositioned, radar domes spinning faster, and convoys of soldiers heading to coastal zones. Rear Admiral Douglas Stain, commanding the carrier group, wasn't looking for war. His mission, officially, was to enforce maritime security. But every move was being read differently in Caracas. To them, the Ford was a direct challenge, a declaration that Washington was willing to fight over the Caribbean. The stakes couldn't be higher. The U.S. had already struck drug boats weeks earlier, claiming to target trafficking networks. Yet, to Venezuelan commanders, this was just cover for a larger encirclement. At this point, a single radar lock, a single misread signal could turn a standoff into a firestorm. And in Caracas, President Maduro was preparing his own answer, a strategy built not on strength, but on unpredictability. The morning Maduro appeared on state television, millions of Venezuelans stopped to watch. Behind him stood generals in olive uniforms, maps pinned to the wall, and the red, blue, and yellow flag draped above a line of microphones. His words were measured but sharp. If they invade, we will turn every street, every mountain, and every port into a battlefield. Within hours, military trucks rolled through the cities. The Defense Ministry declared the activation of 4 million reservists, farmers, teachers, and workers now called to arms.
The U.S. has reportedly deployed a massive naval and air presence off the coast of Venezuela.
In the barracks of Maracay, pilots readied their Russian-made Su-30 Mk2 fighters, each armed with supersonic Kh-31 missiles capable of skimming the sea at nearly Mach 3. Across coastal regions, volunteer militias trained with old rifles and homemade drones. The message was clear. Venezuela couldn't match the U.S. Navy ship for ship, but it could bleed them with speed, chaos, and terrain advantage. This was not a conventional war plan. It was asymmetric warfare reborn, mixing guerrilla tactics with cyber disruption and psychological messaging. Every radio broadcast now spoke of defending sovereignty. Every factory was ordered to switch to military production. The countdown had begun, not toward peace, but toward confrontation. Next, we'll see how Maduro's asymmetric doctrine reshaped the Caribbean chessboard and caught U.S. strategists off guard. Maduro's war council met in a dimly lit bunker beneath Miraflores Palace. Maps covered the walls, marked with red circles across the Caribbean coastline. "We cannot fight them head-on," said General Padrino Lopez, his voice echoing against the concrete. "But we can choke them, bit by bit." That phrase became the new doctrine, drenar al gigante, drain the giant. Venezuela's plan was simple, yet deadly. Instead of facing the US Navy directly, they would spread the battlefield across air, land, and cyberspace. Civilian ports would double as missile hides. Fishing boats would carry radar decoys. Social media networks would flood with misinformation, fake sightings, fake strikes, and fake landings to confuse US analysts. The military began deploying shadow cells, small autonomous units of 12 soldiers each. Their job? Blend into local terrain, track US surveillance drones, and jam communications when needed. Every unit was supplied with portable radar, commercial drones, and encrypted radios built in Russian labs.
And then there's this little pull tab, and you just pull it out, and then you squeegee it down with the squeegee that's in the package. It's pretty nice.
It wasn't about winning outright. It was about delay cost. Each damaged drone and each diverted jet sortie would bleed millions from US taxpayers. And every Venezuelan village prepared to resist became one more knot in the web. For Maduro, this was his Cold War in miniature. "If they come," he declared, "they will drown in 1,000 cuts." Meanwhile, 600 miles north, the US fortress in Puerto Rico roared to life, readying for the storm that Venezuela had already set in motion. Roosevelt roads hadn't seen this kind of movement in 2 decades. The abandoned hangars were once home to rusting vehicles and vines creeping through cracked runways. Now it was a fortress of precision. Engineers worked under floodlights, laying fiber optic cables and installing radar towers that could sweep from the Dominican Republic to Venezuela's northern coast. In the control tower, US officers monitored live feeds from drones circling the Caribbean. The data linked directly to Southcom's headquarters in Florida, where analysts watched Venezuelan aircraft taxiing across runways in Barcelona and La Guaira. The message from the Pentagon was clear: total situational awareness. A KC-130 tanker rose into the sky, its engines low and steady, refueling F-35s mid-air as they practiced long-range interception drills. The sound of jets ripped across the coastline of Puerto Rico, shaking the fishing towns below. Locals filmed the scenes, videos quickly going viral with captions like "War machines over the Caribbean." The base now housed over 3,000 personnel and dozens of high-tech drones. Every move signaled escalation. Every sortie dared Venezuela to respond. But what no one outside the Pentagon realized was this: Roosevelt Roads wasn't just a military hub. It was also a staging point for something far riskier, a covert plan to insert reconnaissance teams close to Venezuelan waters. And Caracas was about to show it wasn't blind. The next move came not from ships.
The U.S. has reportedly deployed a 10,000-strong contingent of special forces,
But from the sky, streaking faster than sound. Late at night, 2 Su-30 Mk2 fighters roared off the runway at El Libertador Air Base. Their twin afterburners painted long orange trails against the dark. Under each wing hung a silver spear, the KH-31 missile. Capable of traveling at Mach 3, it could cross 70 miles of ocean in just over 2 minutes. Satellite feeds caught the maneuver. The jets flew low over the Caribbean, hugging the water, then climbed sharply into the clouds before banking east toward open sea. No missiles were launched, but the message was unmistakable. Venezuela could strike. Within hours, video clips surfaced online. Venezuelan state TV broadcast the footage with thunderous music. Anchors called it proof of readiness. To US analysts, it was psychological warfare, part warning, part propaganda. But to the sailors aboard the USS Lake Erie and Gerald R. Ford, it was a new level of tension. Alarms quietly shifted from monitoring to combat readiness. The KH-31 demonstration had another purpose. It wasn't just posturing. It forced the US fleet to change its distance, retreating farther from the Venezuelan coast to reduce risk. One missile had moved an entire carrier group backward. A low-cost missile had just outmaneuvered a $13 billion warship. Next comes the invisible front, where satellites, hackers, and misinformation collide in a war no one officially admits is happening. At 3:42 a.m., a European commercial satellite captured the clearest image yet. Hundreds of vehicles clustered along Venezuela's northern highway, heading toward the coast. Within minutes, the picture was circulating through US intelligence networks. Southcom's analysts confirmed it. Venezuela was mobilizing heavy armor near Puerto Cabello, its largest naval base. Up above, more than a dozen satellites from the US, France, and even private companies like Planet Labs swept across the Caribbean.
We'll send it to them, they'll approve it, and I'll record it. D-Brand, they sent us this.
Their data was relentless, tracking aircraft heat signatures, oil tanker movements, and even mobile radar units disguised under tarps. Every night, the imagery grew sharper, and every morning the Pentagon's command briefings grew more urgent. But satellites saw only shapes and shadows. They couldn't measure fear or resolve. Inside Venezuela, officers had stopped hiding convoys. They wanted to be seen. It was all part of a show of strength meant to freeze US decision-making. Each photo, each blurred missile shape on a truck added to the uncertainty. How far will Caracas go? Meanwhile, in Washington, that very uncertainty was turning into frustration. A senior defense official leaked to the press that Venezuela is testing us with smoke and mirrors. Yet those mirrors worked. The US fleet held position, watching, waiting, analyzing pixels instead of acting. But while cameras in orbit stared down from space, another front was already opening, one built not on firepower, but on noise, confusion, and deception. By the second week of the standoff, the battle wasn't just on radar, it was on screens. Venezuelan social media erupted with videos claiming US drones had violated their airspace. American outlets pushed back, calling it propaganda theater. Yet in the fog of digital war, truth became a weapon. Thousands of bot accounts flooded X and Telegram with maps, grainy satellite leaks, and fake reports of incoming US landings. Venezuelan state media amplified the chaos. Our cyber army, they boasted, is stronger than their navy. Behind the slogans, real hackers were at work, breaking into maritime communication networks, distorting GPS signals, and feeding false data to ship radars near the Dutch Caribbean islands. For the US, it was a nightmare. One destroyer's radar briefly detected a phantom contact, an electronic ghost projected by Venezuelan jammers. The false alarm sent helicopters scrambling before command realized it was an illusion.
The Miami Herald managed to reach President Trump aboard Air Force One.
The cost of that single confusion, nearly $2 million in wasted flight operations. Maduro's strategy was working. Even without firing a shot, he had turned information into ammunition. Each rumor became a ripple, each pixel a threat. But Venezuela wasn't alone in this new front. A familiar Caribbean power was quietly sliding back into the shadows of conflict, one whose influence once shaped the entire Cold War. While the world's attention was locked on Caracas and Washington, Cuba made its move, quietly, deliberately. Ships from Havana began making humanitarian runs to Venezuelan ports. But US reconnaissance picked up something else: communications gear, spare aircraft parts, and encrypted transponders. For decades, Cuba had trained Venezuelan officers in intelligence and counter-surveillance. Now those old alliances were coming alive. Retired Cuban signals experts flew into Caracas under diplomatic cover. Within days, Venezuela's radar network became sharper, its air defense coordination faster. Cuban technicians even helped rewire old Russian-made early warning stations, giving them new life with improvised parts. American analysts saw the pattern. Cuba was feeding the Venezuelan system just enough to make it dangerous. The Pentagon called it a silent reinforcement. A top intelligence briefing put it bluntly: every radar ping we see might be half Cuban. In Havana, officials said nothing publicly, but their message was understood across the hemisphere. The Cold War lines were reappearing, not with tanks or missiles this time, but with networks, technicians, and old loyalty revived. By now, the Caribbean felt less like a sea and more like a chessboard where every island had chosen a side. Next, the tension shifts beneath the waves, to the mysterious boats, the secret missions, and the quiet strikes that no one will officially claim. Under the moonlight, the Caribbean shimmered like polished glass. Somewhere within that calm surface, fast boats slipped through the waves.
I mean, if you're gonna have a phone like this was $1,000, why not put a case on it that'll keep it safe?
Unmarked, radar silent and nearly invisible. Officially, they were part of the US anti-drug operations. Unofficially, they were scouts, probing the Venezuelan coastline, gathering intel under the cover of narcotics interdiction. For weeks, Washington had justified its growing naval presence with one phrase: counter-narcotics mission. But Venezuelan officers weren't buying it. On radar, these drug boats didn't match any known cartel vessel type. They were too fast, too well equipped. Some even transmitted encrypted NATO signals. When one was spotted off La Tortuga Island, Venezuelan patrols fired flares and chased it until dawn. The intruder vanished, but its presence sent shockwaves through Caracas. Maduro went live that night, accusing Washington of disguised incursions. The next morning, the U.S. State Department dismissed his claim as fiction. Yet within 48 hours, Newsweek reported that one intercepted boat had been remotely guided by U.S. Navy contractors from Puerto Rico. Diplomatically, both sides doubled down. Sanctions tightened. Words like proxy warfare began surfacing in newsrooms. But under the noise, the truth was simpler. The ghost boats were testing defenses, mapping radar gaps, and rehearsing something bigger. And that bigger test would come when the U.S. made a move it swore it never would, pushing straight toward Venezuela's red line. At sunrise, radar operators at Venezuela's Maiquetía base caught a reflection, a formation of aircraft moving along the edge of its air defense zone. They weren't drug planes, they were F-35s. The stealth fighters had flown out of Puerto Rico, conducting reconnaissance runs, though to Venezuela it looked like the start of an invasion. The order from Caracas was immediate: lock but do not fire. On the ground, air defense crews activated S-300 missile batteries. Red lights blinked across command consoles. For a tense 3 minutes, Venezuelan radars tracked the U.S. jets as they flew just 20 miles from national airspace.
Back in June, when similar reports of an impending strike on Iranian nuclear sites emerged,
Then the jets turned back, silent, controlled, deliberate, but the damage was already done. Venezuelan state TV broadcast the radar footage within an hour, framing it as proof of foreign aggression. Crowds gathered in Caracas waving flags and chanting, "No pasarán," they shall not pass. In Washington, officials downplayed the event, calling it a routine patrol. Yet intelligence insiders leaked that the White House had quietly approved the flyover to test Venezuelan readiness. It was a calculated risk, but one that lit a fuse of fury. For the first time in the standoff, both militaries had faced each other directly, radar to radar, pilot to pilot. The countdown to a real confrontation had officially begun. And as the world's attention turned skyward, few realized the Caribbean Sea below was already alive with movement. The next crisis would come not from the air, but from the depths. When the USS Iwo Jima detected a sonar ping off its port side, no one knew what it was. Submarines weren't supposed to be there, certainly not Venezuelan ones. But sonar confirmed the truth. An unknown diesel-electric sub was shadowing the U.S. task force. Within hours, Southcom issued an internal directive: 72-hour alert, maintain contact, do not engage. The order spread through the fleet. Every ship went silent. Engines ran at low RPMs. The Caribbean had turned into a chess match of underwater stealth. Venezuela owned only 2 aging submarines, both overhauled with Russian help years ago. But one, the Sabalo, had been missing from port for over a week. Now it was back in the game, surfacing briefly near La Orchila Island before diving again, somewhere between the Antilles and the Venezuelan coast. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence satellites picked up unusual radio bursts from Cuban relay stations. It appeared someone, possibly Havana, was feeding Venezuela submarine telemetry.
Under Nicolas Maduro, the military has attempted to continue this modernization effort.
The standoff entered its most dangerous phase yet. One sonar misread, one mistaken torpedo echo could mean war. For 72 hours, tension rippled under the sea, silent and invisible. While on land, Maduro called for total readiness. When the sub finally disappeared from U.S. radar, no one knew if it had retreated or was waiting for orders. And then, the unthinkable. One false signal at dawn would bring both nations within seconds of open fire. At 5:17 a.m., alarms screamed aboard the USS Lake Erie. The ship's Aegis radar had locked onto a fast-moving object rising from the horizon. Unknown, low, and closing fast. Crewmen rushed to combat stations. The captain shouted, "Confirm signature!" A few tense seconds passed before confirmation. It was a Venezuelan Su-30, flying low with missile rails visible but empty. For the next 9 minutes, the Caribbean held its breath. The fighter climbed sharply, circled the U.S. destroyer at a distance of just 20 miles, then broke off. No shots fired, no communication, just a silent challenge, a message in motion. On board the Lake Erie, sailors whispered that it felt like being seconds away from history. One wrong radar command and the first missile would have lit up the dawn. Later analysis showed that Venezuelan ground radar had deliberately painted the U.S. ship's position moments before the flyby, proof of coordination, not accident. The Pentagon went into overdrive. Southcom ordered all ships to maintain a defensive but restrained posture. The word restraint was repeated across every transmission that day, as if saying it could hold back war. For Caracas, though, it was a victory. A single jet, flying alone, had forced the most powerful navy in the world to flinch. But that morning's brief encounter was just the spark. By nightfall, the entire Caribbean was watching radar screens and praying that no one blinked first. As darkness fell, reports flooded in.
Sources indicate at least 10 U.S. warships are now encircling the Venezuelan coast.
Radar locks, low-altitude flights, ships shifting course. The airwaves buzzed with static and coded chatter. On the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, pilots sat strapped in their cockpits, engines idling, ready to launch. Across the sea, Venezuelan missile units stood at attention, fingers hovering above triggers. Then confusion struck. A U.S. surveillance drone flying at 25,000 feet lost GPS lock near Isla Margarita. Its tracking system glitched and veered toward Venezuelan airspace. Ground radar picked it up immediately. Within seconds, a pair of Venezuelan fighters scrambled to intercept. The drone turned back, but not before triggering a chain of misread signals. In Puerto Rico, U.S. analysts thought Venezuela had launched missiles. They scrambled interceptors. In Caracas, the Defense Ministry believed the U.S. had begun a strike. For 15 minutes, both sides believed the other had fired. Only when satellite feeds confirmed no impact did the order go out: stand down. 15 minutes. That was how close the world came to war. And in those 15 minutes, communications across the region went dark. Governments held emergency meetings. Markets dipped, and ordinary people across Latin America refreshed their phones, fearing headlines that never came. The near war passed like a ghost, but its shadow lingered. And as dawn broke over the Caribbean, both leaders faced the same impossible question: retreat or escalate once more? By sunrise, the U.S. carrier group had repositioned 150 miles northeast of Venezuela. F-35s circled above, while Venezuelan radar scanned the horizon non-stop. The sub Sabalo was still unaccounted for. Both nations claimed control, yet neither truly wanted the next step. Behind closed doors, Washington's National Security Council debated whether to impose a no-fly zone. Generals warned that a single mistake could ignite a regional war involving Cuba, Nicaragua, and possibly Russia through proxy support. One missile.
They have a top speed of over Mach 2 and a combat radius of 1,500 kilometers.
An aide said quietly. And the hemisphere changes forever. Meanwhile, in Caracas, Maduro's generals urged him to declare total mobilization. But he hesitated. The war he promised to fight in every street might destroy the nation before a single bullet hit the ground. Still, he needed leverage, and so he ordered one final move: a nationwide broadcast showing fully armed Sukhoi jets and mobilized coastal forces, daring the U.S. to make the next move. At sea, American radars picked up the broadcast's transmission signal. The carrier fleet stood ready. Commanders watched the horizon, fingers inches from authorization. And then, nothing. Silence, just the hum of the ocean. The war that nearly was stayed unwritten, for now. The Caribbean crisis faded from headlines, but the standoff changed everything. Washington now treats the region as a live combat theater, while Caracas celebrates defiance as victory. Yet both sides know the truth. One wrong signal, one wrong move, and peace could vanish overnight. The next chapter, it's already being written.